Imagine waking up in a world where questioning makes you dangerous, and silence makes you virtuous. A world where the mind, once humanity's most powerful tool for discernment, has dulled into passive acceptance. This isn't a dystopian future. It's now. Today, we're witnessing the erosion of critical thought and the dangerous rise of collective stupidity. From viral misinformation on social media to the uncritical embrace, or blind fear, of artificial intelligence, the signals are everywhere. And unless we reclaim our independence of mind, we risk becoming nothing more than echoes in someone else's chorus. Critical thinking is not merely a set of academic skills or intellectual gymnastics. It is the act of pausing before reacting, the courage to step back and ask, is this really true? Is this truly right? It is the willingness to hold a thought in your hands, turn it over, examine it from multiple angles, and resist the temptation of instant judgment. At its core, critical thinking is the quiet rebellion against passivity, the refusal to be swept away by the noise of the collective. Yet today, this discipline is vanishing before our eyes. In a culture obsessed with speed, efficiency, and emotional immediacy, contemplation has become a liability. Instead of rewarding depth, society prizes hot takes, quick replies, and surface-level opinions. People no longer ask whether something is valid, they ask whether it's popular. If enough people repeat it, it becomes true by default. Think about the subtle shift in our language. Once, we framed ideas in terms of thought. I think that. Now, far more often, we hear, I feel like. Feelings are important, but when they replace reason, when they become the measure of truth, we surrender something essential. Truth ceases to be anchored in evidence, and instead drifts on the tides of emotion and collective agreement. Carl Jung warned of this danger. He observed that when individuals surrender reflection to the collective, they dissolve into what he called the mass psyche. In this state, the individual self is absorbed into the herd, losing its autonomy and depth. Nuance disappears. Complexity is flattened. What remains are slogans, hashtags, and tribal identities. This is why online movements often feel electrifying but shallow, their momentum built on contagious emotion rather than careful evaluation. Consider social media as the perfect example. A post goes viral, not because it presents a well-reasoned argument, but because it stirs anger, amusement, or outrage. Thousands share it instantly, without reading beyond the headline. In a matter of hours, perception hardens into truth. Yet ask the same people days later, and many cannot even recall the original source. This is not thinking, it is echoing. The danger is that once we normalize this pattern, we stop noticing it. The erosion of critical thought becomes invisible, like water wearing down stone. Each time we react without reflection, each time we outsource our judgment to the crowd, we participate in the slow fading of our own independence of mind. Jung would call this a loss of individuation, the process of becoming fully ourselves. When we abandon thought to the collective, we abandon part of our soul. So we must ask, what happens to a society where this becomes the norm? Where fewer and fewer individuals pause to question, reflect, or challenge? The answer is already visible. Echo chambers in politics, ideological polarization, misinformation treated as fact, and a culture where dissent is punished rather than valued. What signs of this disappearance do you see in your own life? Is it in politics, where partisans echo their tribe's talking points? On social media, where slogans replace debate? Or even at work, where questioning authority feels dangerous? Share your reflections below. Your voice may inspire someone else to think a little deeper. So what is driving this retreat of reason? Why has critical thinking, once seen as a basic human responsibility, become so rare in modern culture? To understand this, we must trace the deeper currents shaping our minds, our systems, and even our identities. The first force is societal conditioning. From the moment we are young, we are rewarded for compliance more than curiosity. Most people learn early that speaking up, questioning authority, or challenging consensus comes with consequences. To go against the grain risks ridicule, isolation, or worse. Whistleblowers in corporations and governments are powerful examples. They reveal uncomfortable truths, yet instead of being celebrated, they are often punished, discredited, or cast out. This conditioning trains us to stay silent, to nod along even when we sense something is wrong. Conformity becomes the safer choice, while inquiry feels dangerous. Education reinforces this conditioning. For decades, schools have prioritized obedience, memorization, and test performance over true inquiry. As John Taylor Gatto argued, modern education was never designed to nurture independent thinkers. Instead, it was built during the industrial era to produce efficient, compliant workers who would not disrupt the machinery of society. Students are graded on how well they repeat answers, not on the originality or depth of their questions. Over time, many learn to equate intelligence with the ability to absorb and regurgitate information, rather than to challenge it. The habit of memorization replaces the discipline of reflection. But even if education had encouraged deeper thought, today's world presents a unique challenge: information overload. Human beings are now bombarded with more data in a single day than entire generations before us encountered in months. News headlines, notifications, emails, TikTok videos, tweets, podcasts, endless streams of digital noise flood our awareness. Overwhelmed, the brain defaults to mental shortcuts and heuristics. Instead of carefully weighing evidence, we rely on social proof, the assumption that if enough people believe something, it must be true. This is why conspiracy theories, emotionally charged slogans, or clickbait headlines spread faster than carefully reasoned arguments. They bypass the slow system of thought and hook directly into our emotions. Social media intensifies this effect. These platforms are not designed to cultivate depth or dialogue. They are designed to capture attention. Algorithms feed us content that aligns with our biases, creating echo chambers that reinforce what we already believe. Outrage, division, and emotional reaction are rewarded with likes, shares, and algorithmic amplification, while nuance is buried under the avalanche of engagement-driven noise. What results is not conversation, but polarization, masses of people shouting past each other while believing they are thinking critically, when in fact they are being manipulated. And beneath all of this lies something even more personal: fear and identity. To think critically is to risk not only social exclusion, but also inner discomfort. If your identity is tied to your political tribe, your religion, or your community, questioning a cherished belief can feel like betraying who you are. It can fracture friendships, families, even one's sense of self. And so, many choose comfort over truth, belonging over independence. In the end, the causes of this decline are not just external forces acting upon us. They are woven into the very structure of modern life, shaping how we learn, how we connect, and how we see ourselves. Critical thinking has not disappeared by accident. It has been slowly conditioned out of us, replaced by conformity, distraction, and fear. Even intelligent people fall into the traps that erode critical thinking. Intelligence alone is no safeguard against the psychological mechanisms that shape how we process the world. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman described two modes of thought. The first is fast, instinctive, automatic, and emotional. The second is slow, deliberate, rational, and effortful. Both are necessary, but in today's high-speed, overstimulated culture, the fast system dominates almost everything we do. The result is a society reacting more than it reflects. One of the most powerful traps is confirmation bias. Once we accept a belief, our minds cling to it with remarkable tenacity. We unconsciously filter information, seeking out evidence that supports our position while dismissing or ignoring what contradicts it. The truth becomes less important than maintaining coherence with our worldview. Think of how debates around climate change, political scandals, or public health unfold. People often defend their stance not because it rests on the best evidence, but because to question it would threaten their identity, their group loyalty, or their sense of control. In this way, beliefs become shields against uncertainty, rather than doorways to truth. Another psychological snare is groupthink. Jung described this as the herd mentality, the dissolution of individuality into the collective. To belong feels safer than to stand apart, and so dissenting voices go quiet. In boardrooms, workplaces, classrooms, and even families, decisions are often shaped more by the desire for harmony than by the pursuit of truth. People see flaws in a plan, recognize gaps in logic, or sense ethical concerns, yet remain silent because speaking out risks exclusion. History is filled with tragic examples of disasters, corporate collapses, political blunders, even wars, born not of stupidity but of conformity. When no one dares to question, error multiplies unchecked. Then there is the quieter but equally dangerous loss of inner dialogue. In an age of constant connectivity, many of us have outsourced our thinking to external authorities. Instead of asking, "What do I truly think?" we open a search bar. Instead of wrestling with uncertainty, we scroll until an influencer provides an answer. Even the rise of artificial intelligence brings this temptation, the possibility of letting machines replace the uncomfortable work of personal reflection. But Jung insisted that individuation, the process of becoming a whole and authentic self, requires turning inward, confronting our own unconscious, and asking difficult questions. Without that inner conversation, we remain fragmented, pulled this way and that by the noise of the collective. The irony is that these traps do not only capture the naive or the uneducated. They ensnare the brightest among us because they operate beneath awareness, woven into the architecture of the mind itself. And this is why vigilance matters. To resist them requires not only intelligence but courage, humility, and the willingness to face discomfort. Have you ever defended a belief, not because it was true, but simply because it was familiar, because letting it go felt threatening? Share your story below. When critical thinking declines, the costs are immense, not only for individuals, but for entire societies. The erosion of our ability to pause, to question, and to reflect leaves us vulnerable to forces that thrive in the absence of discernment. It creates conditions in which manipulation flourishes, freedom shrinks, progress stagnates, and those who do dare to think find themselves increasingly isolated. The first and perhaps most immediate consequence is vulnerability to manipulation. A society that does not think deeply is a society easily swayed. Propaganda, fear campaigns, and emotionally charged narratives slip past our defenses when we abandon the discipline of critical evaluation. In the digital age, this vulnerability has only grown more dangerous. We now face the rise of deepfakes, AI-generated misinformation, and algorithmically amplified outrage. In such an environment, truth is not determined by evidence but by virality. Those who control the levers of media and technology hold unprecedented power to shape perception, and a population dulled into passivity becomes the perfect audience for deception. This leads directly to a second consequence, the loss of freedom. Carl Jung warned, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." To live without reflection is to live unconsciously, governed not by reasoned choice but by hidden drives, cultural conditioning, and collective forces we do not see. In surrendering thought, we surrender freedom itself. We may still speak of liberty, but without the ability to discern truth from manipulation, our freedom is hollow. We become puppets whose strings are pulled by economic, political, and cultural powers that rely on our compliance. A third consequence is societal stagnation. Innovation and moral progress do not arise from conformity. They require minds willing to challenge what is given, to push beyond what is familiar. Without independent thinkers, societies become stagnant, producing endless copies instead of genuine breakthroughs. The culture becomes trapped in cycles of repetition, recycling trends, recycling slogans, recycling shallow debates that never touch the deeper issues. When imagination and reflection fade, so does the ability to evolve. Civilization becomes brittle, vulnerable to collapse, because it has lost the resilience that comes from creativity and honest questioning. Finally, there is the personal and painful consequence of isolation for those who continue to think. History shows us that progress has often come not from the masses but from the few who dared to resist them. Reformers, visionaries, and truth-tellers have nearly always been outcasts in their own time. They endured ridicule, exile, imprisonment, or worse. To think independently in a world that rewards conformity is to step into loneliness. And yet, paradoxically, this isolation also carries a strange form of power. The willingness to stand apart creates the possibility of genuine change, because it preserves the integrity of the individual against the pressure of the herd. The decline of critical thought, then, is not a minor inconvenience. It is a civilizational danger. Without the courage to question, we are left exposed, enslaved, stagnant, and divided. And without individuals willing to bear the burden of thinking for themselves, there can be no path forward. If the decline of critical thought has brought us to the edge of a cultural and psychological crisis, then the only meaningful response is to reclaim the mind. This reclamation will not come from institutions or mass movements, but from individuals willing to take on the quiet, often uncomfortable work of thinking for themselves. It is, in many ways, a rebellion of the most silent kind, one waged not on the streets but within the interior space of awareness. The first act of resistance is to rediscover the art of questioning. Most of us have been trained, often since childhood, to avoid asking too many questions, to accept what is presented to us without much resistance. Yet true thought begins by interrupting the automatic flow of agreement. When we ask, "Why do I believe this? Where did this idea come from? What evidence supports it, and what evidence might contradict it?" we open a door back into reality. This habit of inquiry seems simple, but it is profoundly disruptive. It cuts through slogans, exposes manipulation, and prevents us from mistaking the familiar for the true. Socrates once said that the unexamined life is not worth living. Jung would add that the unexamined mind is not truly one's own. But questioning requires something modern life rarely offers: the ability to slow down. Our culture glorifies speed, filling our days with endless information, notifications, and demands for instant reaction. To think, however, we must reclaim silence. It might be as simple as walking without headphones, journaling in solitude, or meditating long enough for the restless mind to settle. In these moments of stillness, reflection begins to reappear. Ideas are no longer swallowed by noise but given space to grow roots. Without slowing down, there is no ground on which critical thought can stand. Closely tied to this is the practice of metacognition, the ability to think about our thinking. Most of us live caught in our reactions, mistaking emotional surges for reasoned conclusions. To practice metacognition is to notice when we are reacting from anger, fear, or tribal loyalty rather than from evidence and understanding. It is the discipline of catching ourselves in the act of unconsciousness and choosing, instead, to become aware. Jung described individuation as a process of bringing what is hidden into consciousness. In many ways, metacognition is that very process, shining a light on the habits and biases that usually operate in the dark. Another essential discipline is learning to hold opposites without collapsing them into easy binaries. Jung insisted that individuation required the integration of polarities, the rational and the irrational, the conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow. Applied to our world, this means resisting the temptation to oversimplify complex realities. Consider artificial intelligence. It is both an opportunity for human progress and a potential danger. To think critically is not to retreat into blind optimism or fearful rejection, but to acknowledge the tension of both possibilities at once. Holding opposites stretches us beyond comfort, but it also deepens our capacity for truth. Finally, to reclaim the mind is to choose truth over comfort. This may be the most difficult act of all. Jung once remarked, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." To think critically is to face those parts of ourselves we would rather keep hidden, our biases, our contradictions, our fears. It is to let go of beliefs that once gave us belonging or identity, and to accept the loneliness that may come with that choice. Yet paradoxically, this painful honesty is liberating. To choose truth over comfort is to step into a life no longer dictated by illusion, but guided by clarity. In the end, the way back is not complicated, but it is demanding. It asks us to question, to slow down, to observe our own minds, to hold complexity, and to endure discomfort. These are small acts, but together they form a quiet rebellion, one that protects our humanity from dissolving into the herd. To reclaim the mind is to reclaim freedom itself. Critical thinking has never been the default state of humanity. History shows us that the work of questioning, of seeing clearly, has always belonged to a courageous minority, those willing to step outside the comfort of the herd and face the world with unflinching honesty. To think deeply in a culture that glorifies speed, conformity, and emotional reaction is not simply a skill, it is an act of quiet rebellion. And it may be the greatest service you can offer, not only to yourself but to society as a whole. The world does not need more noise. It does not need more outrage, more slogans, or more blind allegiance to collective opinion. What it desperately needs are deeper minds, people willing to pause before reacting, to ask the questions others avoid, and to seek truth even when it is uncomfortable. It needs your mind, awake and aware, unafraid to stand apart from the crowd and willing to take the harder road of reflection. Carl Jung believed that true freedom comes not from belonging to the collective, but from the courage to become an individual, to face the unconscious, to question the illusions we inherit, and to live in alignment with truth rather than popularity. That path is not easy. It may isolate you, it may challenge everything you once thought certain. But it is also the path to authenticity, clarity, and a freedom that no system of manipulation can touch. So I invite you to share your perspective. How do you personally practice critical thinking in a world that rewards conformity? Your insights may spark reflection in someone else. And if this video gave you something to reflect on, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us again for the next deep dive here at Psyche Mirror Studio. Together, let's keep the quiet revolution of the mind alive.